Hi everyone, and welcome to Thesis Bootcamp Part 1. In this presentation, we will go over what a thesis is and how to write a good one. Whether you're writing a personal essay, a short story, an argumentative paper, or an expository paper, that is, a paper where you explain something in detail, your writing will have a central goal, and this is the main reason for putting pen to paper. The goal is what you want the reader to take away. Ask yourself, what is the one reason you're writing this paper? What is the one thing you want your readers to believe or understand when they put down your paper? So what is a thesis? A thesis can be thought of as a central idea, a claim, a single sentence summary of an argument, a roadmap for the paper, what you want the reader to take away, or a statement about the significance of your paper. A good checklist to use is as follows. You might ask yourself, do I take a position others might challenge or oppose? Your thesis should not be something everyone already agrees with. It should not be a fact. If it is, there probably isn't much point in arguing it. You'll also want to ask, is my thesis specific? If it is too broad, it is probably too big of a topic for you to prove in just a few pages. Does my essay support my thesis is another good question. So as you go through your essay or your drafts, you'll want to ask, does all of the material, does all of the evidence and analysis support the claim that you're arguing? And then also, is my thesis a claim? So it shouldn't be a fact because there's no point in arguing a fact. So how about these thesis statements? Read them. Can you prove them? Are there facts? Would anyone argue with them? And who cares? Evaluating a thesis. There are distasteful things about horror films. That's pretty broad. It's not very interesting. Apples are tasty. That's an opinion and not really something that you're going to have a conversation with someone about, unless you're just telling them that you like apples. There are many people in the United States. That's a fact. The Great Gatsby is a good book. Could be an argument, but again, it's not very interesting. There's not a lot of high stakes. There's not a lot of stakes, and it's pretty broad. So how do we change this and make stronger thesis statements that are more interesting and more argumentative? So theses have one central point. Effective thesis statements focus your essay on one major idea with specific examples to support it. So some of the problems, and this kind of goes back to the 5-paragraph essay that I want everyone to get away from, and a model that you shouldn't use. So a weak thesis can have too many points. So for example, the library should buy more books, be given more funding from the dean, and remodel its online system. Rather, you can say, to improve the resources available to students, the library should acquire more nonfiction and reference books. This is one specific thing, and you can argue it coherently in just a few pages. In an argument, the central idea is explicit. You will do your research for whatever position you are taking, and then you will write a thesis statement, usually at the end of the introduction section. An introduction is usually 1 or 2 paragraphs in a short essay, and the introduction typically provides an overview of some of the positions and debates. Then, after you lay the foundation, you will provide your position. This is a version of what is referred to as they say, I say. You can also think about it as entering the conversation. So when you're writing your paper, any argument that you are presenting, imagine that people are having a conversation or a debate about it, and you want to get into that debate. So usually you'll say something like, while this person thinks X and Y, or while it is commonly thought that this is the case, I think this. So it's saying that it's making it relevant and important, basically. You're saying that while some people think this, I think this. So you're making an intervention. So this is an example thesis. While many college administrators have argued that school reopenings are safe because students are generally low risk, they often overlook the fact that universities require people from at-risk groups to run smoothly, including not only professors, but often thousands of employees that do everything from clean, provide food, and ensure that facilities operate smoothly. These staff members are often overlooked, but they should be central to considerations of whether schools should reopen. So this is a two-part thesis, but really the last sentence is the main argument. The first sentence here provides context. It's kind of a they say, I say. It makes the stakes apparent. You can see why it matters. You can see the type of argument you're engaging with, the type of people you might be having the conversation with. And it kind of makes the stakes clear. The second part is the actual thesis. And again, this is kind of an example of a section of the introduction where you'll have like a hook at the beginning, and then you'll provide the context, and then at the end you'll provide your argument that you're making after the reader understands what's at stake. So is your thesis strong enough? A weak thesis makes no claim. This paper examines the pros and cons of X and Y, of students going to school or schools opening or not. While that is relevant, a thesis means you take a position. So in your paper, you will examine the pros and cons, but you also have a position, you have an objective, you have something that you want to put forth. A weak thesis states the obvious. Globalization is complicated. Students going to in-person classes is complicated. Okay, that's a fact, and most people kind of understand that that's a fact, so you don't really need to argue it. It's not really an argument. A weak thesis states conventional wisdom. Love conquers all. It's not really something you can prove, especially not in a 3 or 4 page paper. A weak thesis offers a personal conviction as basis for a claim. Shopping malls are great. Okay, that's an opinion, and nobody's really going to care about it that much. A weak thesis is too broad. Individualism is good. That's a very broad thing, and many people have written many books about the topic. So if you can imagine that someone can write a book on your thesis, then maybe you should narrow it to something more specific that you can actually take on in 3 or 4 pages. Evolving a thesis. There are negative and positive aspects of opening schools. So this is an example of a very weak thesis that isn't really an argument. It's kind of just a statement. To strengthen it, you can say, based on X and Y, student populations would be better off if schools reopened or didn't in the spring. Okay, so this takes a position. You'll still go over the negative and positive aspects. That'll make a strong argument. You want to have the argument and the counter arguments, but you take a claim, and that claim is apparent in your introduction. Another one, Smoke Signals is a pretty good movie. So a better thesis would be, Smoke Signals uses Native American stereotypes to show the complexities of cultural belonging. So this is just an example of a strong thesis statement, or a thesis statement that puts something interesting and specific forth. Evolving a thesis, part 2. The Great Gatsby is a great novel. So why do I care? So a way that you can check this is to just read your thesis statement to a friend, or someone at the writing center, or someone else, and see if they understand kind of what's at stake. So we talked about the stakes a little bit earlier, and then we'll talk about the stakes a little bit when we focus more on introductions. So a revision might be, in The Great Gatsby, Fitzgerald develops a contrast between industrial rural life and aristocratic city life, showing the contrasting lifestyles and morals of the city and the country. So this is good, specific, interesting, relevant for people who don't even care about the novel itself. It says something about culture. It says something about the lifestyle and the culture and the conflicts. in the US, possibly in general, and also at the time that he was writing, which was the 1920s. So any of these things can so this last revision makes it more interesting and kind of raises the stakes a little bit, and makes it more generally appealing. So different types of arguments. So whether you're doing an analysis or a position paper or any sort of paper, almost, there are different ways of presenting an argument. So if you're writing about a film, then of course you're going to be doing a film analysis, and your evidence will come from that. If you're trying to prove that schools should or shouldn't have online teaching or have in-person teaching, then that's a different kind of argument. You're going to be using different evidence. So these are some examples of different types of arguments. So based on X and Y, student populations would be better off if schools reopened or didn't in the spring. That's one. Growing up in a household of people who have different perspectives on politics and life has made me think more critically about my own positions and assumptions. And this is one of the reasons I developed a love of books from a young age. So this is a kind of example of a literacy narrative. And then commuting between rural Florida and Orlando has allowed me to appreciate the many different cultures we have right here in Central Florida. So this is another kind of just. And then, so the final thing is introduction paragraph. So this is an example. We're going to talk about this more, but basically, to put it all together, you have a hook. So you have something that draws the reader in, something that's interesting, that kind of lays out the scene and the stakes and things like that. And then you make a transition to the topic itself. You could say other people have thought this X and Y about the novel, but I think this. So that's a good way of kind of situating yourself in the discussion. And then the final part will be the thesis. So at the end of the introduction, which is 1 or 2 paragraphs usually, it's up to you, whatever you think is appropriate. Just don't go on, too long, especially in a short paper. At the end of that, you'll have the thesis, and then you'll kind of begin the body of your essay. If you have any questions, please email me. Thank you for watching.